This is Revs Confidential with Julian Cardillo and Frank Dell'Apa.
Frank Dell'Apa, my co-host. We move to video, my friend. Good to be with everybody. This is, maybe you want to call it the inaugural edition of the revamped Revs Confidential podcast. Pleasure to be with you, Frank. Great to be here with everybody. This is something that we're going to slowly build out. As you all know, for the last 3 or so years, Frank of the Boston Globe and myself of various publications have been covering the Revolution, and we've had the Revs Confidential podcast on Patreon. The patronage isn't going away, but we wanted to bring the podcast to a new medium. And what better time than summer, the summer of soccer in MLS in the United States. A year out from the World Cup, not so great right now, Frank, from a U.S. men's national team perspective. I had a blog earlier this week where I said they should be stoking excitement, not warding off anxiety. But we'll get to that later. For now, Frank, how are you? How are you this evening?
Yeah, good, Julie.
Awesome. Well, we have a lot to get into. I think we want to have this podcast be structured around the Revolution first and foremost. It is Revs Confidential, but also talk a little bit about the U.S. national team, which opens up their Gold Cup account this weekend as well, as they prepare or hope to prepare for the 2026 FIFA World Cup. But Frank, maybe let's start with the positive, which is the Revolution, who are unbeaten in 9 going into this weekend's game at FC Cincinnati. And I think everyone sort of knows that a big reason why they're unbeaten in 9, at least in league play, is that they changed formation. And all of a sudden they're a different team and they seem to be clicking, Frank.
Yeah, I think great move by Caleb Porter to figure that one out, right? 2 months plus without a loss. This is quite a turnaround for a team that was really, a year ago, right? We didn't think that was going to happen. So, yeah, I think if we want to talk formation, I think it's just freed up Carlos Gil a little bit in the wings, with the outside backs now able to move up into the attack. And it's a whole different deal. I think the opposition is sort of trying to catch up, and teams are trying to figure out sort of how to do the same thing or counter this.
Well, I think the X factor right now in the 3-5-2, yes, it is getting Carlos Gil more on the ball, and we'll talk more about Carlos Gil as we always do, since he's the engine of this team and the captain of the team. But I think really the main X factor is the fullbacks. Peyton Miller and Ilay Feingold earlier this season were playing in far more defensive roles. And one of my criticisms actually was that I didn't think that Feingold was getting up enough, really. And he wasn't playing early crosses in. And it seemed like he was always favoring his weaker foot, in part because he was on the weaker side of the field. But both those players have really come into their own in their own ways. Ilay Feingold, Frank, is the first foreign-born fullback to score in back-to-back games for the Revolution in long, long time. In fact, only 3 fullbacks have ever scored in back-to-back games. I'm going to leave it up to you to tell me who the other 2 are. But then Peyton Miller coming into his own as well. He's only 17, but he's looking wise beyond his years and starting to get some attention overseas. There was a report at the end of last week that Tottenham were starting to look. And I think both of us and anybody who's really covering the team day to day knew it was sort of a matter of time. Peyton Miller has probably been one of the top 5 fullbacks in the league this year, and that's no hyperbole. But maybe Frank, tell me your general impressions on the fullbacks and what you've seen from both these guys.
Yeah, excellent. They've been they've been freed up in this formation, and like you said, so they've gotten into the attack. Last game, thanks to Giacomo Vrioni with Montreal playing with 10. I mean, the Revolution just sent both those guys up into the attack, from the 36th minute on. So that worked. I think they'll have to be a little more cautious against Cincy, but Yeah, those guys are really just changing the whole dynamic. So I think the both probably won't be here forever or even for much longer the way they're playing.
Well, you mentioned both those guys again, and given that this is the 30th season of not just MLS but also the Revolution, I've been having a lot of fun going back into the archives and the history books, and so I'll ask you, Frank, do you know off the top of your head the only two foreign fullbacks who have scored in back-to-back games for the Revolution? I think you'll get one. I don't know if you'll get both.
I didn't know we were going foreign. You really got me out of the country on that one. I was going to go with like Kevin Alston and guys like that.
You were going to guess Kevin Alston to score in back-to-back games? No way.
Well, yeah, I did. Yeah, I don't know. Jay Heaps, I mean, those guys were really good on the right side. Revolution kind of had that position covered from early on. So, okay, foreign fullbacks. I'm going to give up on that one right now.
Well, to be fair to you, it's actually very rare for fullbacks in general to score in back-to-back games for the Revolution. But the two guys that did it, and actually one of them scored in 3 consecutive games, were Ted Chronopoulos, who is, of course, a Greek-American, and Ivan McKinley. So those are the only two.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's your trivia. And now with the international window, Ilay Feingold, and this is so interesting because both of us follow Italia very closely. Ilay Feingold might have a shot to qualify for the World Cup with Israel, Frank.
Yeah, absolutely. I think they've got a shot, and he's got to be in their plans, although he didn't get called up in this last window. But yeah, absolutely, the future for that team. I'm going to go back real quick. I think Ivan McKinley and Ted Chronopoulos kind of got into the similar situation as Ilay and Peyton Miller, basically, moving up into almost a 5-man midfield. And that's one reason why they were able to get forward. It's a different era, though, because the way these guys are playing now is, you wouldn't recognize, those guys now coming. But they did get up forward. Not with they weren't at the same age. They didn't have nearly the same potential as Ilay Feingold and Peyton Miller, though.
Well, so it's interesting because Ted Chronopoulos was sort of a rare breed. Came into the Revolution in the 90s and stayed until midway through the 2002 season. And the reason I say he was a rare breed was because he was a Greek-American, born in California, but before he came to MLS, he was playing in First Division Greece, and he was actually playing. He was playing in a top European league, which the Greek league is. It's not Serie A, it's not the Premier League, it's not La Liga, but I would say that the Greek league is a top European league. And then he came to MLS, and he was a meaningful contributor to the Revolution. Big part of that initial era, starting in 1996, and then he was actually quite useful to the Revolution. I put this in a blog last week, but he was useful to the Revolution up until the very end, and I mean the very end. When he left, he was part of like a 6-player trade that brought Daniel Hernandez and Brian Kamler to the Revolution. And Kamler and Hernandez were instrumental in the playoff run in 2002 that led them to the MLS Cup final. And then Hernandez left the Revolution and then came back in 2005 and 2006, for 2 other cup runs. But, good chance that Hernandez especially, but certainly Brian Kamler and as well, doesn't come in unless there's a trade piece in Ted Chronopoulos. So I think the Revolution got all the value that they could out of him. And he was more than just a value piece. He was really like an integral part of the initial team. And what I also said was, it's good that a lot of new fans, especially who don't know who Ted Chronopoulos or Ivan McKinley are, or probably even Daniel Hernandez and Brian Kamler, have an opportunity to see those names now, 30 years on.
Yeah, I think some of those guys will be back. I think for the August 9th, I think, game, they're going to come back to be honored too. And I'm pretty sure Teddy Chronopoulos will be back. He came from Panionios, I believe, and he played with some really good players there. The Greek league at that time too, there was a lot of crazy stuff going on there too, and he survived all that. Had some great stories about it too, and went on from here and won what was essentially the USL championship in Carolina, I believe, down there. So he was still a pretty good player. Ivan McKinley came up from Tampa, South African. He went to school at Lynn University down in Boca Raton, I believe. And, he was a pro. He played for South Africa. And, those guys are pretty interesting guys. Hopefully, people should talk to those guys when they come. They got some great stories.
Well, I'm glad that they are coming, and it was really cool to see that release come through my inbox. I will say that as we get closer to that date, I think I want to do something on who's not there, because there are a number of really, really instrumental and influential Revolution players that, as of yet, may not be coming, but no need to be controversial. Frank, let's get back to the current league play, the actual current season that Revolution find themselves in. We mentioned the 9-game unbeaten run, and now they've had a week off. We've asked the momentum questions before, but it's not too often that the Revolution put together a 9-game unbeaten run. Usually when we're talking about this, it's maybe 2 in a row or 3 in a row. 9 games is pretty historic. I don't know that there's been too many since, the 11-game unbeaten run to start the 2005 season, Frank.
Yeah, good call on that one. And the significant thing is this was compiled, the streak, mostly on the road. I think there's a 7-game unbeaten road streak, which ties a team record. That's pretty impressive. But now the Revolution sort of has to, you get in that mindset, which they did and did well on the road. Now, can they do it at home? It's a real question, because I think we have to realize that a lot of these guys on this team, they haven't played at Gillette Stadium that often, right? They just came to Bradenton in the preseason. They'd never been to Boston, and now this is their home field. And it's, in a way it's their home field, but they haven't played a lot of games there, much of the team. So, and knowing how teams are going to play against them, it's a little different, right? They come in and try to spoil the game, and I'm not sure these guys are quite used to that yet. It's a team, though, and players that don't seem to get shaken by any of that stuff. And, sometimes it's better not to even know all these details, just go out and play. So I think they'll be okay, but it's not like they're at home. They've established a home field advantage, and they kind of know what they're doing there. And they haven't done the fortress type, defensive thing. They haven't gotten into that quite yet. I think the mindset could be there, but we'll see what happens.
Yeah, well, I remember earlier this season, we were talking about some of these guys coming in and not really knowing what to expect between the turf and the New England weather. And I don't have it in front of me, but I'd be curious to know what the temperature was at kickoff in the San Jose game, which was the last home game, and what it's going to be when they play their next home game. Because now it's like apples and oranges. It's been really rainy in New England, but it's also been hot in the Northeast in general. And, it was windy and kind of miserable not too long ago. So a little bit of whiplash. And I do think that does play a role, especially with a lot of these foreign guys coming in, Feingold, Fofana, Ceballos, Ganago, and on and on. But even so, I feel like the Revolution have a really interesting test on the road this weekend at Cincinnati. This is an environment that even when the Revolution have been, say, a weaker side, they've been kind of unafraid going into Cincinnati. They've always played well here. Doesn't mean that they're guaranteed a result, but they sort of come in looking for blood, and I think that's positive. Now, I will say that Cincinnati brings their own potency as well, and certainly this is going to be a tough nut for them to crack. But the one thing that I've been sort of looking at as I look at this 9-game unbeaten run is there were some games, Frank, where even against sides that are in the standings lower than the Revolution, I expected the Revolution to blow it, basically, and they still haven't done it. And I think being hard to beat sometimes is better than being favored to win. And I think there's something about the Revolution's formation right now and the way that they're playing that's stumping teams. And I think you might have hit on it at the beginning where, teams are trying to figure out what's going to work. It used to be that you just surrounded Carlos Heel and that was that. And to a degree, I think that does still work. But it's not going to work for 90 minutes straight through.
Yeah, and it's harder to do that, I think, in this formation. And I think Kevin Porter really hit on this. He thought he's a little bit ahead of the curve on this, too. We talked a little bit about that, this week before the Cincinnati game. And he kind of, acknowledged that. And a lot of other teams are doing similar things to the Revolution all over the place, certainly in MLS. And it's just sort of the way you got to play now, something like this. Okay, so yeah, I think teams aren't able to find Carly's heel as easily. They do chase him around, and the Revolution is doing what they always said they should do. Is if Carly's heel's marked heavily, leave somebody open, somebody's got to take advantage of that, and that's exactly what happened against Montreal when Ilay Feingold scored the second goal, I believe it was, and Montreal was all over Carly's heel and left him open, and he took advantage of it. So if the Revolution continue to do that, which they've always said they should do, even if Carly's isn't contributing as much, it's freeing other guys up.
Yeah, of course. And as you were talking, I was just looking at the standings, and Revolution are currently not in a playoff position, but they're also 6 points out of fourth place. And there is an expanded playoff field as well. But then you look at Cincinnati, they're in second. And frankly, I think you would expect them to be there. They're also quite strong at home. They're 5-1-2. Offense, defense, relatively even. I'm going down a little bit of a tangent here, but I think the standings right now are tight conference wide. And so I think that there's going to be a lot of shuffling for the remainder of the season, really. And before we started rolling, Frank, I said to you that it seems like this weekend is really a jumping off point for a lot of teams. It seems like this is actually the start of the summer of soccer on the U.S. calendar. And this is kind of like the cutoff point where it's like, we are out of the beginning season mode. Like now everything is moving. We've got the Club World Cup. We've got the FIFA windows and the CONCACAF Gold Cup. Players are going to be playing in more games. There's going to be more attention, more eyeballs on them, which means the pressure gets ratcheted up. I just sort of wonder, if you take stock of the Revolution at this moment before they go into Cincinnati, how would you rate this team right now? Do you feel like they're at least a favorite to be in the playoffs? Do we feel like maybe their value is a little bit overinflated? Is this sustainable? I want to get your take on this first, Frank.
Yeah, I think that you have to go by points per game. Revolution's actually a little higher in the standings, but they just have to prove. I think they have 3 home games in a row, whatever it is, so they have to prove that they can win these games at home and take advantage of being a little, it's an uneven schedule. So they played 15 games, everybody else is 17. So but you've got to take advantage of that. And if they do that, then, like you say, this is kind of a transition time for them. Again, 11-day break after the Cincy game. Again, another home game though. So it's time to just kind of collect on those points in those games in the bank. That they had to suffer through 10 away games out of 15. Now you have to take advantage of those home games.
Yeah, and I don't disagree. I think the last question I asked is it sustainable? And sooner or later the streak will end. In fact, it may even end this weekend. But I think much has been made of that streak, in part because they did lose in the middle of it. They did lose to Chicago in the U.S. Open Cup. So I actually think that's a good thing that they've tasted defeat somewhat recently. It's also good, though, that on the back of this streak, they're going back home. And they're going to have to figure that out. I think that there's sort of this question of, will they show up at home in the way that we expect? And really the only way out is through. I'll say that I'm surprised by how tight the Eastern Conference is. and there's still a lot of soccer to be played. And I sort of see the Revolution vying for anywhere between 5 and 10, but certainly based on what we've seen and the way they've had teams stumped in the last few weeks, Frank, I feel like this team is on track to make the playoffs. Are they going to have a playoff run? Well, I think it's way too early to determine that. But maybe two more questions on this before we cut to the next topic. I'd like to know from you, who do you think has been an unsung hero so far for the Revolution this season, Frank?
Okay, really good question. I guess I just taken by surprise a little bit, Canago, I guess, because he's only got one goal. He's played a lot of minutes, and the guy is there at the end of the game. He's won penalties in stoppage time, late stoppage time, that were really key wins, that aren't huge stat things, and you can measure it however you want to measure it. But when you do that in the 90, plus minute, and you're a veteran player, that means you're running to the end of the game and really creating problems for the other team. And, eventually that stuff pays off. You can say all that stuff, but it's really hard when you're up there alone sometimes. And you say, all right, am I going to make this run again? When I'm probably not going to get anything out of it. He's going up against two centrals a lot of times. So I just convinced myself that he's the unsung guy. So
I'm actually going to cheat a little bit and go with two, and it's going to be Brian Ceballos and Mamadou Fofana. And the reason I'm saying that is because I think that they're both hard to separate. Really have come in, they don't know each other at all. They don't know the league at all. They don't know the weather at all. And they've resurrected a defense that was just terrible last year. And maybe it wasn't due to the players necessarily. Maybe it was the style of play. But even so, even when the Revolution were shaky to start the season, I thought that both those guys were really holding things down nicely and giving the offense, which was sputtering, some cover. It's been really good to see both of them come in. And actually, I personally would like to see one of them maybe get an all-star nod. I'll say as well, Frank, that as you know, and anyone who has followed my coverage of the Revolution in MLS knows that I am no fan of the MLS All-Star Game. I think give these guys a certificate, give them a cash bonus, and then be done with it. Saying that, I think it would be a real shame if either of those guys didn't get some kind of a recognition, a midseason recognition like the All-Star Game affords. And so far, at least what MLSsoccer.com tells us about the voting, no Revolution players are favored in the fan vote. So I have to believe that someone, whether it's Don Garber or the coach, I actually don't know who's coaching the team this year, though I probably should. We'll pick Carlos Heel, and I'm hoping that maybe Peyton Miller or Mamadou Fofana or Brian Ceballos get a look as well, because I think they deserve it. Frank, if it's good with you, I want to transition a little bit to the U.S., who have had a miserable week and are about to start the CONCACAF Gold Cup. We were actually going to talk after the Turkey game, and then we decided to delay and talk after the Switzerland game. I had another article come out earlier this week, and the basic tone of it was like, where have we seen this before? And what came to mind for me was the 2011 USA-Spain game at Gillette Stadium, which was also a send-off before the CONCACAF Gold Cup. And the U.S. got completely outclassed with a relatively inexperienced team. And then they went on to have a really terrible Gold Cup. And in fact, Bob Bradley was fired right after that. The difference, Frank, between the 2011 Gold Cup and the 2025 Gold Cup is that the U.S. had 3 years to figure things out. They had 3 years to get rid of Bradley, to reevaluate the player pool, to basically get the guy they wanted in the seat and get the team qualified for the World Cup. The U.S. now has less than a year before they host the World Cup. And as I said at the beginning, they should be stoking excitement, not warding off anxiety. So for me, it's a bad situation, not because they lost to Switzerland and Turkey, but just for what the state of the roster is and for what the Gold Cup is supposed to represent in terms of a final preparation. But over to you.
Yeah, okay. I'll add to that and say it's not just the Switzerland and Turkey losses, which the U.S. had a bit of a inexperienced lineup and all that stuff like that. But remember, they have a 4-game losing streak, but that losing streak started when everybody was in the lineup and they played against Panama and Canada. That was their A team, right?
Yep.
So there's like double discouraging things going on there. So yeah, I think the Gold Cup, they probably could do okay. I mean, look, the competition just totally changes there. It actually kind of prepares you, even if you play badly and you look terrible against really good teams like Switzerland and, or in Turkey. Then you go play Trinidad, Haiti, and Saudi Arabia, you're probably going to be okay. So how far they go beyond the group stage, if they get out of the group stage, they probably could be okay in the Gold Cup. It's still not a hugely great preparation, though, for the World Cup because you're not playing teams that are really going to test you, at the level that you need to be tested. But maybe it will, like you say, get them back to a position where they're stoking enthusiasm instead of, the opposite.
Well, a lot of attention has been put on Mauricio Pochettino and Pochettino. We're Italians. We say Pochettino, but we'll call him Poch. I don't want to take anything away from the guy, but it seemed to me like when Greg Berhalter was fired, it just seemed like the federation said, hey, Pochettino's available. Let's just take him. Don't feel like they really had their heart and soul in the search, and maybe they felt rushed. Now, that's not to take anything away from Mauricio Pochettino. But for me, the real issue at play here is why the A team isn't at this Gold Cup. Now, there's been a lot of ink spilled on Christian Pulisic in particular. There's been this, feud in the media between him and Landon Donovan and Pulisic's father. And I think Pulisic actually spoke on the Tony Meola podcast today to try to put this to bed. I don't care about that drama. I think if you're the coach of the U.S. national team and you're a year out from the World Cup and you have this one last shot to get your best players together to prepare for the World Cup and build chemistry, I think it's on you to find a way to agree to terms with Pulisic and McKennie and Weah and all these guys and find a way to bring them in, even if it's on a limited basis. Does Christian Pulisic need to play 90 minutes against Trinidad and Tobago? Does he have to play 15 minutes against Trinidad and Tobago? Probably not. But I think this team should look far closer to the team that Pochettino wants to bring to the World Cup than what it is. I think a lot of these guys, Kevin Sullivan and Max Arfston, I'm sure they're going to have great careers in MLS and maybe beyond. Maybe they'll be the future of the national team someday, but bringing them out a year before the World Cup to play in a Gold Cup, bringing them out against a highly technical and seasoned Switzerland team is not it. And part of me wonders if Pochettino advocated enough for the team. Because I feel like regardless, even if Pulisic needed a break, I don't think that there was any sitting this one out, Frank.
Yeah, I don't know what that process was. I think Pulisic has played a ton of games. He's injury prone, especially if you push him, to do too much. So it's probably, I can see it that way where, look, maybe he needs a break. The thing is, though, I think, the limited minutes thing, I think once you commit to a tournament and playing, as a competitor and as a coach, it's hard to pace the guy, you got to put him in there and he's probably going to want to, go 75 minutes or 90, so it's a tough one to do there. I think the problem is the way the U.S. and a lot of teams now do this. These games are like 90 minutes, 100 miles an hour, right? You got a high press. There's no backing off, right? You can't pace yourself. So guys are, some games that are relatively easy, you've got to really you expend a lot of energy and, put yourself in difficult positions unless you're a really good team. Now, Switzerland came here and you saw how they played. They pressed and they defended and they put a lot into it, but mostly they kept the ball, right? they didn't expend a ton of energy. Guys, put themselves in some tough positions once in a while, but they weren't flying in there with crazy tackles and all the stuff that we're expecting the U.S. to do. And that's how the U.S. plays. When they're playing well, it's kind of chaotic out there. So it's a tough call. I don't think the U.S. is quite there yet where they could have guys come in and just play like a good game. And, like if Switzerland was in the Gold Cup, they could play, guys would play no problem. And they would dominate, I think. And they'd go 60, 70 minutes, they'd take them out because they just got it. Technically, they just dominated the game tactically, where the U.S. can't do that. So it's a real conundrum. And I don't think Mauricio Pochettino really understands this. He hasn't been here long enough with the U.S. team. And he's expecting to put in guys that haven't played much, and they look okay, but they're just not ready for it, and they can't improvise. They're not sophisticated tactically or technically. The Switzerland game, they should have made those changes themselves. Mauricio Pochettino put a fifth defender in to stop the bleeding, against Switzerland. Those guys should have said, look at, man, let's drop somebody back here. We're getting killed on the wings, but they just didn't know to do that. Not their fault, but it's just a different game. So I guess I'm just saying that, like, it's a tough call. So Pulisic, all those guys, they probably need a break. And, would somebody do it differently? I don't know.
Well, I think they do need a break, and the amount of games that they've played that all players are forced to play now, especially those in Europe, is insane. And a lot of these guys, they're about to play in the Club World Cup on the back of a long season. So listen, I fully sympathize with Christian Pulisic. I think the issue at play is that the World Cup is a year away, and you're also hosting the World Cup. Now, I believe, and I have nothing to back this up, but I believe that as World Cup hosts, with the talent the U.S. has, they should at least be a quarterfinalist. That needs to be the benchmark. But I don't see. I just don't see the stars aligning for any of that to happen. And aside from maybe picking on Pulisic a little bit, in part because he's the captain of the team, I don't know how invested Pochettino is in this either. He's not living in the U.S. full time. Still doesn't really seem to be able to articulate out loud a clear vision for this team. I don't know. And it kind of goes back to the original question of like, okay, well, why was he hired in the first place? Was he only hired because he had the most impressive resume and he was available? I don't know. Now, to be fair, I also think that a change needed to be made. But where we are now, it just seems like it doesn't really matter what happens in this Gold Cup because most of these guys aren't going to be playing the World Cup next year. And maybe there's going to be a great training camp where everybody comes together in May and June next year, and that'll be that, and that's all Poch needs. But call me skeptical.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. But I think also going into it fresh, here's another way to look at it: is that it's an expanded field. There's going to be a lot of teams in there that aren't that good. So if the U.S. can get a decent draw, which they could, then they're come in really fresh, and you're playing, a couple teams you can beat. You can get through the group stage, and then in the second round, it's going to be a round of 32, not a round of 16. So now you've got like 31 teams out there that, maybe a couple of them aren't that good. So maybe you're going to get a break there, and then you move on. So if they play 5 games, that would be great. If they're fresh, maybe that's a good way to do it. I think on the hiring, though, I think, Pochettino's a good coach. Yeah, he was probably one of the most prominent guys that was available at that time. U.S. had $6 million to pay this coach, so they wanted to bring in somebody big. Matt Crocker was in charge of that. He had a connection with Pochettino with Southampton, so he wanted to make a big splash. I think it makes a lot of sense on paper. I think Poch is a really good coach, really good at a lot of things. I just don't think he's really has a grasp or grip on what's going on with the U.S. team, though, and it's a bit of a learning curve. It'd be better, like you said, if it was like 2011, you had 3 years to get ready. That would be better. I think probably be okay. Now it's kind of a crash course.
Well, from my vantage point, I don't think the U.S. is favored to win this Gold Cup. Just based on their form, based on who they have in the roster, I think I would bet on Canada, Panama, and Mexico to beat the U.S. And actually, I think it's possible that somebody else could beat this U.S. team too. But certainly, I favor Canada and Mexico, and probably Panama as well, to edge the U.S. in this tournament. Which begs the question, if the U.S. doesn't make the final, or if they don't win, will they just sort of shrug it off and say, well, we didn't have our A team, we put out a bunch of prospects? Or will they really take a hard look and say, we've got less than a year to get this team on the same page and turn this group into maybe not a contender, but a team that can do some damage in the World Cup? And Poch isn't the guy to do it. My inclination is that they will stick with Poch no matter what happens, unless they absolutely bomb. And I mean, like, they finish second in their group or worse. And then, they're done after an elimination game or two. Basically, they're semifinalists and they don't even win third place. My gut says they stick with Poch because they're too risk averse to what it would mean to change the team. And honestly, Frank, we've had a lot of discussions about coaching changes with Caleb Porter in the last few weeks and months. Maybe you don't think it's a good idea to make a change this late either, because Poch on paper is a good coach and it makes sense, and it's just too risky being this far away. But I do think it's at the very least, this is a topic of discussion, and it's going to get brought up if they have a bad Gold Cup, Frank. Yeah,
I mean, I think bottom line is on the risk averse thing and the investment. There's a lot of money in that salary that they don't want to. U.S. Federation is not going to want to pay off. So I think they're committed to him. It's a tough call to bring somebody else in too, because that guy's going to be under the gun with a bit of a learning curve and trying to get the confidence of the players. So I don't even know who that would be. So I think they got to stay with him. But you're right. I mean, it's going to raise some huge questions if they start bombing out and don't look too good here. But I think they probably would do okay in the Gold Cup. What's okay? I don't know. But if we're talking about them like, being an underdog or equal to Panama, that's not really a good sign.
Yeah, I agree. I've always said, though, the U.S. has this thing where the talent is high, but when you put them together as a team, I would take the MLS guys that were there in 2002, just because they just worked better as a team. For how good the U.S. portends to be, they should be beating teams like Trinidad and Tobago and Honduras and Guatemala like 6 or 7-0 every time. And instead, it's like 1-0, 1-1 on the road. Like, it's really hard to play CONCACAF games. It is hard to play CONCACAF games, and these teams are actually legitimately getting more competitive. But it just seems like it's an excuse. I don't see how you can compete with some of the best teams in Europe and then just kind of shift into a lower gear against regional competition. To be fair, they're not looking good against anybody, though. So we'll leave that there. Frank, I want to ask you one last trivia question. It's a little bit late, but we haven't spoken since the Champions League final, which was a terrible game, by the way. If you're a PSG fan, great. But from a neutral perspective, that was not a fun watch. I was at a bar in Brooklyn, New York, standing room only. And first of all, it was great that people cared that much about the game. No problems there. But you couldn't sit, which means you couldn't eat. And the game was a total blowout. And there was really no point in being there after halftime. But anyway, so yeah, not a great game. But question for you, Frank. And I think you'll get this right. Who is the only player to play for the Revolution and before or after playing for the Revolution won the Champions League?
Well, we've talked about this guy who played for Porto, I believe.
Yes, you got it.
And Eddie Jankowska is coaching Lithuania now, and let's see if they can sneak into the World Cup.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, well, maybe that's a little bit of an anticlimactic ending. So let's do it this way. We are bringing Revs Confidential to YouTube. The goal is to be consistent with this and to really grow the channel. The channel is called Cover the Pitch. It's based off of my personal blog, which you're welcome to subscribe to. But the Revs Confidential is going to be its own playlist on the Cover the Pitch channel. Another update for me is that I will be contributing as a writer, Revolution coverage to the Boston Herald. I'm very, very excited about that. Should be about 2 or 3 pieces a week. And there's going to be more stuff to come. You're welcome to continue supporting us on Patreon. We're going to keep that open. We're going to be communicating with people about the change to YouTube on Patreon. That way we can maintain the podcast on Spotify as well. Remember to subscribe to the Boston Globe so you can get Frank's coverage of the Revolution and occasionally other people cover the Revolution for the Boston Globe as well. And now do the same for the Boston Herald, as we've got Herald and Globe represented here on the podcast. Follow Frank on X at Frank Dell'Apa and me at Julian Cardillo. Thank you to the Revs Confidential theme song, which I have added to a really cool intro. And thank you to Neil Rosenthal for the Revs Confidential tunes. And my wife is the one who intros us. So thank you, Carly. And happy anniversary to us. It's been 1 year. And I think that is where we'll have Revs Confidential sign off, Frank. Have a good night.